Hey everyone, I am Lyndsey Smith, your host. Welcome to this edition of the Agronomists. It's going to be a really great chat, I can tell. Maybe because the comments already coming in are focused on tea and whiskey. So if that's any indication of how tonight's going to go, but I will agree. So hello Ray, hello Scott. I agree, whiskey and tea do go great together, especially if you're a little chilly coming in. Put on a pot of tea. Whiskey goes great. Okay, yeah, just we're switching one vice for another, but I'm never going to give up my coffee, I promise. Okay, something new for tonight before we get rolling. We are, of course, streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, but we actually are also on LinkedIn. So if anybody catches this show on LinkedIn, let us know, send us a shout out. Love to know who's following along where. So that's kind of cool. Okay, and of course, as always, for watching tonight, you do qualify for CEU credits if you collect those. So head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow morning. This will be posted and you can give us all your info there. So there you go. All right, without further ado, this episode is all focused on wheat and wheat establishment, some really cool things like ultra early seeding, and some really neat stuff happening out of Alberta. And of course, we've got some recent findings from here in Ontario as well from seeding trials. So without further ado, I bring in Joanna Follings with OMAFRA here in Ontario and Brian Beres with AFC in Lethbridge. Welcome here, Brian and Joanna.
Hi. Thanks for
Hello.
having
Hey
us.
there.
How you
We
doing?
made it. Yeah, I'm doing well. And okay, and now both of you have been on this program before. So now I feel like, we can really push the limits of what's possible on this platform because of course we're such
Oh, really?
we're such seasoned people. You know what, really I just hope that my internet connection stays. That's it. That is the bar. Also the second bar is, will I make it to any clip? So I do have, of course, 3 clips for tonight. One of them we've played before, so we're just gonna play a little bit of it later, probably. But I think we'll get to at least 1 or 2 of them. But let's kick it off. We are, of course, talking Ontario and Western Canada, so we're talking, winter wheat and spring wheat, but that's okay. Because there's certainly some principles that apply to both. But I do want to start off the evening with a really cool thing that's happening right now in Alberta. Brian, if you can catch us up, we're going to talk ultra early seeding. But when we say ultra early, someone has decided they should try fall with spring wheat. And why not Durum? So catch us up. What's going on with this seeding trial with putting Durum in the ground right now?
Well, we're trying to, I guess, in some ways, get the horse back ahead of the cart again. Um, when we started our concept and project originally, and we started showing good results, one of the first questions, because some of our planting dates for our spring wheat were as early as mid-February, a question from farmers was, okay, what about in the fall? And up till now, I always said, well, I've done a lot of work in winter wheat. Why don't you guys try winter wheat first to try and, you know, push them in that direction? But that's a hard sell sometimes to a spring wheat grower. And we were lucky enough to get a new project funded by Sask Wheat, specifically on Durum. And it seemed like a good time to try because we have farmers here in southern Alberta going ahead and doing it. And so we want to run parallel to that, a full test of the hypothesis to see, what's going to happen if you dormant seed spring wheat in the fall here, because the context is a little bit different than Ontario, where it's frost seeded, and a lot of potential around that, but it's not necessarily always a frost situation here. So our planting operation is, if you caught it on Twitter, it was a regular planting operation. So we'll see
Mm-hmm.
what happens.
So, and that, I guess, is a bit of the difference. And if anyone's following along, as you mentioned, there's been some tweets showing some pictures, some of what's been going on, some video as well. This isn't. I mean, the ground is not frozen. This isn't frost seeding. It's just cold. So the concept really is. I mean, you're putting the seed into cold storage, basically. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So the idea is, we want to hold, like, we still fall within the true definition of a dormant seeded situation because we are holding off until November. So this time period between November and January is where we would say is a true dormant seeded, provided that the soil temperatures are cold enough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Durum probably would take off and try to sprout at 3 to 4 degrees. So we want to get in when it's at the warmest 2 degrees and cross our fingers it stays that way. So we went in, I forget what Steven Simmel, he tweeted that out. And it sure got a lot of uptake. There was like 4,000 some views of it. So clearly there's an interest, but I think he said they were at right around 2 degrees. And that was kind of our protocols. We want to be two or less. And
Right.
interestingly, the week before was Sarita Farms out of Rolling Hills, where they went in and they had a tweet of them. I don't know what their soil temperature was, but pretty interesting and a good test for us to assume the risk to see what happens,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a lot of farmers out there. But I sure appreciate some of these early adopters or those farmers that are willing to assume a bit of risk too, because it'll be nice to see those two situations unfold in a parallel type situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose, as you mentioned, I mean, the risk is it's got to stay cold enough, which sometimes you think not that big of a deal, but every once in a while it can be a big deal. So, I mean, I think, like as you mentioned, I mean, we're almost December. You'd think it's late enough. So I guess that is the risk, and that's what we'll have to see is if you get into a bit of a warm spell, would it germinate far too soon, like months too soon?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then it's toast, right? So
Yeah.
we know what happens. We're real confident about the ultra early system and using the prescribed soil temperatures that we've you know provided as a prescription and a trigger to go, which is 0 degrees as soon as it registers 0 degrees in the wintertime,
Hmm.
or 2 degrees, that range. But dormancy, this type of a situation is a different beast, and we really haven't tried it out a whole lot out west here,
Hmm.
particularly in the context of Durham. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Now this is the first year. How many years is this trial?
We'll run three more, yeah.
Run 3. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at
Okay.
least.
Yeah, very neat. All right. Well, I mean, absolutely, we will be following along for sure because it is fascinating. Now, Joanna, I want to bring in, and we've sort of teased this a little bit on the radio show. We've been following along on the Wheat School, of course, with the trial that you've been doing at the Follings Research Farm, as we call it. Yeah, and so if anyone who's familiar with the Wheat School has been following along, but I did want to. I want to dig into that trial a little bit more tonight. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see. Although I've heard rumor that not that we wish ill on anyone, but it was a pretty good year for wheat.
It was a
So,
great year for wheat.
yeah. So I guess that before we go, I want to go to we will go to a clip and then we'll dig into some of the data that you've brought. But yeah, was there any adversity in these trials whatsoever?
Lodging was our biggest adversity at heading
Okay.
time, but to you're right. From establishment right through to essentially when it lodged, it was pretty optimal conditions. So compared to what we're seeing this year, we were definitely set up for way more success compared to if we were to see something this fall. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And so did you do this trial again this fall?
So we didn't plant the same trial at the same farm this fall. I think my wonderful siblings who harvested the trial for me were, after spending hours staring down at that header with the lodging, needed a break. But there are some growers that we do have who are doing some comparisons with the Cedar Force
Okay. Okay.
compared to a conventional drill. So we'll have some more data. We've also got some really, really strong data from Michigan State, and they're seeing very similar results. So in this study, so this was them commenting, so you could see at the time it was pretty lodged,
Wow, yeah.
and it made for a pretty big challenge. But all in all, the trial, yeah, it was optimum. We seeded it on September 16th. The conditions were absolutely perfect. The soil conditions couldn't have been any better. And by November 1st, we had over 650 growing degree days at this site. So the tillering, the root development, everything that we got in the fall was perfect. So essentially what I think this trial really reinforced is nothing beats good agronomy. If you've got really good agronomy, you seed at your optimum time, your optimum rates. Obviously Mother Nature plays a huge role in all of this, and as we're experiencing that this fall. But really good agronomy goes a long way, and I think that's what just this trial highlighted. So at the end of the day, we had no results. So we looked at that. Our question was, if we've got an old drill, we aren't sure if we want to make a big investment into a new drill. There's lots of this technology with precision planter out there, that helps us with our seeding depth, our plant to plant, variability is reduced. Is it worth the investment? And so that's what we essentially wanted to investigate. So we had this conventional no-till drill, 10-inch rows, compared to a no-till drill that was 7.5 inches, then a drill that was equipped with cedar force. And then, of course, we brought in the Borgo drill, which was new to Ontario. I know the technology is quite common in Western Canada, but for Ontario, that was new, right? So we wanted to see how these all stacked up. And we can throw up the yield data here. And at the end, we had numerically quite the spread between the sunflower drill, which was 128 bushels, I believe, to the cedar force with MAP. We had 3 bushels there. And actually what was interesting at this site was that we had almost a 10 bushel response with the cedar force with no starter. But at the end of the day, none of this was statistically different. And so what that means is that the variation in yield between these treatments is likely just the variability in the field itself, and it's not actually because of the drill or the treatment. The other piece with this site is it's got lots of manure history, dairy manure, hog manure, so our soil test levels were quite high, and so we didn't see, the starter responses that we would typically anticipate. But I think that just reinforced the data we have. If you've got soil test levels, especially for P in Ontario, below that 20 parts per million, we're more likely to see that response compared to at a site like this where we had very, very high P and K values. But it's really interesting. So, and this site was pretty consistent with other sites we had in Ontario this year. But what's interesting is if you look at the Michigan data, much like what we saw here, not huge differences rather between the 7.5 inch and 10-inch rows. But once we got beyond the 10-inch rows, we start to see a yield lag. And what they found with the precision planter on average was about a 4.4 bushel response. There was, again, variability in that study, but that's what they were typically seeing. And what was really interesting is they found, that much more consistent plant-to-plant variability, like that was reduced. So the plants all emerged at the same time. They went and developed through the growth stages at the same time compared to conventional drills that were looked at in their study as well. So it was pretty neat. I also think I've got a photo there that showed, and where I think we might see some differences in the future is, canopy closure and light interception. And with the precision planter, we found not only did we get that canopy closure a little bit sooner compared to, say, the sunflower drill there, wider rows, but again, those plant-to-plant variability was definitely reduced. And if you're trying to cut through things like corn stalks or any sort of heavy amounts of residue, that cedar force really shined. And I wish got a photo prepped for this for tonight, but we had a row where we had the sunflower drill and, you could tell that it was bopping around. We had a lot of gaps, whereas with the cedar force, we really minimized that over those corn rows. So it definitely has a place, and I think we need to look at it more. What that fit is, I'm not quite sure yet, but we're definitely interested in learning more. And especially with things like seeding rate, maybe with the precision planter, we can actually reduce our seeding rate, which is what they're actually finding in Michigan. So some interesting stuff in our first year anyways.
Yeah. And also knowing where the end of your siblings' patience is. Also smart. Good
yes,
to know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you
Siblings.
all,
Okay.
yes.
We do have some questions that have come in. one quickly from Jason wants to know the model of the drill for the Burgo and the John Deere. What models were they?
Oh, I have
Yeah.
to look that up. I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head.
I'll be honest.
Especially
I'll
the
be honest.
Forgo, because yeah, oh, this is embarrassing. I should have double checked that before I jumped
Okay.
on here.
They all look the same to me, I'll be honest. Although hats off to you for calling it a Burgo, because I have heard some really interesting pronunciations here in Ontario.
Oh, so what does everyone call it?
No, it is a Burgo.
Okay,
That is,
okay.
yeah. It's just other people don't. Okay, but a question for a comment and then a question for you, Brian. Essentially talking about fall seeding or early winter seeding, really, of these. Are we? There's Ken, I think, has brought up that they did try it years ago. There was a concern though about, I guess, insect feeding or disease, and so now I'm assuming this is treated seed that's going in the ground. But what are some of the environmental, the biotic stresses that you might be concerned about or trying to manage for?
Okay, so that's a really good question, and again, just a reminder, we'll cover that off a little bit later, I think. But this is all about dormant seeding that we really are initiating for the first time. So, we're certainly not here tonight promoting it. We're just sort of giving everybody a heads up that this is something that we're trying, and we've done a lot of work with seed treatments actually, and so what we've learned from those studies is that I'm a big advocate of seed treatments, and especially dual fungicide insecticide seed treatments, and for probably a counterintuitive reason, in that I'm not that worried about biotic stresses. Maybe in dormant seeded, but the reason we promote it for the ultra early seeded project, or frankly with our winter wheat, where if you think about winter wheat, it's going in September, so it's more prone to all those issues around predation than even this is. But what we see, from a Western Canadian context, is that the seed treatments are giving us superior resistance to the abiotic stress. And so we've done multiple studies, and in every study, you get significantly more plants in the field, more vigor, with a dual fungicide insecticide. And that neonic component is critical, because what they all do is they all work to change the metabolic pathways in that plant, and basically doesn't it essentially prevents it from kicking into a stress response. So it's pretty cool, and so for sure, anybody experimenting with either dormant, winter, or even our ultra early strategy and super early spring or even winter, it has to be packaged with the dual fungicide insecticide seed treatment.
And Joanna, we just here in Ontario, remember those days when we had access to neonics. Okay. Just kidding. You can get them.
Not going there.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going. That's not tonight. Farmer Schneck. So Warren is making fun of me for not knowing the difference between drills and says that sheep all look the same, and absolutely they do not. So don't even. Anyway, no, they don't.
I don't pretend to be an equipment person.
Yeah, I just like it to work. I just want it to do what it's supposed to do. That's it. I don't really care about any of the other stuff. Anyway, but so no, there's some good comments there, of course, on just how poor some of these are. But Ken follows up with that he wants to try seeding spring crops in the fall, but the price of canola seed and now wheat make it very expensive to risk. So that's exactly what you said, Brian. This is why we have a research trial doing it, where the risk is in the trial, and we're going to learn all those hard and expensive lessons in the research so that farmers don't have to go and do it and
Yeah,
do
and I
all
guess
that, right?
I forgot to add, like, we're not just doing this in southern Alberta. Both the ultra early and this study here, we have it in Indian Head, Saskatchewan, Saskatoon. We've had it up as far north as Dawson Creek, and so it's not necessarily a regional thing. And we'll see. Like, in fact, my colleague Bill May in Indian Head, he's a little bit hotter on the idea of dormant seeded versus an ultra early strategy later on, because perhaps the soil conditions are better now than they're going to be later on. So, so there's that argument to be made too, but we'll see. But from a cost and an input strategy, we'll talk about it later probably. hands down, that ultra early seeding system pays for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
And I do want to get to some of that as well, because of course we do have some results from this year, which it was an incredibly trying year, and really some interesting things. So we've got some experiences from not just Alberta, but Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well, that that certainly, it seems like the ultra early the ultra early really paid off. I did want to point out that Jason says that the sunflower double disc drill belongs in the bush like band sprayers and air seeders. Those are some strong words.
Ooh.
Okay.
You know what?
Yeah,
It's
I don't know.
interesting because I kind of felt the same. I felt like it was time to let that drill retire, which is one of the reasons we did this study. But it came back and it proved us wrong. And we actually had the highest yields on our farm this year with it. So, yeah, I mean, I guess we can't totally give up on it, but I do agree with you.
I feel like you probably can let it go though. Like, I don't know. I mean, and this is one of those, I mean, that is a big question, right? Is when you're going to replace a piece of equipment that's tired or it's done, what do you replace it with? And is that the time to make a big leap? Is that the time to make a big investment? And so these are, oh, and Peter has joined the chat.
Oh, there we go.
I feel like we need
1590.
Here we go. Yeah, it was a JD 1590. Okay, Pete. So what was the Virgo? Okay. Anyway, so we'll get there. I do look at this. The journey to the first clip. It's 8:24. This is what happens when we get going. So I think, Joanna, I'm going to play your clip with Pete.
Okay.
So that we can see. You did share some images, but we've got some in the field look. This is from this spring, where you do go over some of those canopy closure and some of those. So we've got some really good visuals, and we can talk a bit more about this trial and things you noticed through the year. So producer Jay, if you are there, I think it's clip 1. Maybe it's clip 2. The one with Joanna and Pete. You'll know which one it is. All right, let's watch it.
We've been here a couple times. You maybe recall that this is where we're looking at the differences in drill technology, and we have 4 different drills here, lots of stuff going on. But one of the main things that we're really investigating is how do we get the wheat crop to be more uniform? So Joanna, what are we seeing here?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So I'm standing in the sunflower drill here. We've got 10-inch rows, and you can see, we don't have a lot of canopy closure. There's some spacing and differences in staging between plants. We've also got some gaps. But then when you look to where Peter's standing right now, you can see that plants are very, very consistent across the row. They're all at the same stage. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that carries through to harvest and whether or not that makes a difference at harvest time.
Yep, and what's cool is that we have, like, the sunflower drill doesn't have cedar force. I'm in cedar force, but we have the John Deere without cedar force. We have a Bourgault drill here with the same technology as cedar force with that automatic down pressure. One of the most interesting things as we look across these plots is where we have the cedar force. And this is corn stalks, clearly corn silage. Man, we still get a stand with the cedar force, whereas with the John Deere drill without cedar force, once it's on that corn row, the stand really tends to fall apart. So that we didn't expect that, but it is really cool technology. And then the second thing, of course, is row width. And so you can quite clearly see that Joanna's got some issues in terms of the canopy there, but what's intriguing in this row width study is we've looked at row widths over time, but some excellent research coming out of Michigan State University with Manny and Dennis and the wheat program there. Very cool stuff. They have 2 years of data, and the yield increase to narrower rows is huge, right? Like, when they went from 7.5-inch rows to 10-inch rows, or pardon me, from 5-inch rows rather, from 5-inch rows to 7.5-inch rows, there was a 10 bushel per acre yield difference. When they went from 5-inch to 15, there was 27 bushels per acre. We've never seen those kind of yield differences.
Not in Ontario.
No, but it really is interesting in terms of how planting date plays with that, right, Joanna?
Yeah, so the difference is there is that the earlier planted the crop was, we didn't see as much of a yield benefit to those narrower rows. We didn't seem to get that jump on yield. But where it's really interesting is when we go later planting, we're not getting as much growth and development in the fall. And so those narrow rows really made a difference in terms of yield on those years where we're planting later.
Yep.
So that's really cool stuff coming out of Michigan, and we're looking forward to seeing what the year 2021 brings us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the early planted stuff, they still got some yield increase to the narrow rows, and this is early planted wheat. I'd expect
September
a yield
16th.
increase for sure, but it's much reduced over that later planted wheat, which is just another thing to rattle through your brain. Of course, how do you know if you're going to plant early or late? So if narrow rows pay, we got to go there, but how we get there is a whole nother thing. Last on this, weed control. What about this, Joanna? Like, gosh, I think there's lots of space where you're standing for my weeds to grow.
Exactly, and that's what's been really interesting at this site is we can really see the value in narrow rows in terms of weed control. We know wheat is super competitive, but there's lots of opportunity in these wider rows. If you look around here, we've got some shepherd's purse, we've got chickweed coming through, and those winter annuals can be really challenging to control. They're getting much bigger. You know, I know it's only April the 4th or 5th here today, but the temperatures are ideal and those annuals are gonna really take off. So it's really, really critical to get out into your fields and see what, weed control pressure you have there, especially in these wider rows. Compared to where Peter's standing, there's really not a whole lot that we have going on in those narrow rows. So it's very, very critical in terms of weed control timing to get out and know exactly what it is that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and what really, 90% weed control. We can get 90% weed control from a canopy, and that's why wheat tends to be more competitive often, because it builds that canopy early. But better canopy here than there. And by the way, talk about an opportunity this year. It's April the 5th. It's dry. It's warm. You can actually go spray those winter annuals and do it. Get out and spray those winter annuals because they haven't bolted, they haven't gone to flower. Now is when we start to set yield. Now is when weed control actually pays the most. So this is an incredible opportunity. Whether you're 7.5 or 10, you have shepherd's purse or chickweed or dandelions.
Canada fleabane.
Yeah, any of those stinking things, just get them out of the wheat crop. They're all bad. With that, we're going to be back again, right, Joanna? We're going to come back?
We're going to keep track of this site right through to harvest. We'll be back hopefully in a couple of weeks. We're going to see where things are at, and if we've got some exciting things to show you, we'll definitely keep you in the loop.
So Joanna, did you spray it?
We actually right after that, things turned very cold and very wet for a very long time. So the wheat basically stayed at that growth stage for probably another 4 to 6 weeks or so. It did not grow really and just stayed there. But we did get a herbicide on, but it did turn cold and wet and made that application pretty challenging. And that's my shameless plug for fall weed control in Ontario, if you're able to do it, especially for those shepherd's purse, fleabane, and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Although this fall, well, I guess there was an earlier window, but this fall the weather has just been awful.
This fall unfortunately did not allow for that. For folks who planted in September, if they planted before the rain or did, pre-plants, burn downs or things like that, they were able to, but the fall wheat control this year is pretty limited, I would say. Folks were just trying to get the wheat planted.
Yeah, I was going to say, we can talk about where that number is in a little bit, but because I think it's better than we thought it was going to be. But we'd always, as the cereal specialist and Pete's hanging around, I'm sure we'd like a few more 100,000 acres that have gone in, but they have not. So I want to shift gears a little bit into to the ultra early seeding. Now there was a question about Hessian fly, but I think Peter's handled that. As far as I understand it, Hessian fly isn't really an issue in Canada, is it? I know it's in other areas.
It can be, but the bigger one though with wheat and the area that we're promoting this would be wheat stem sawfly. And the thing to think about when you're planting wheat spring wheat this early is you're essentially mimicking a winter wheat system. And what do we know about winter wheat, especially in Western Canada, is that its life cycle is asynchronous to a lot of the diseases and insects. So in other words, it escapes a lot of that stuff. Or it's at an unattractive stage, or it's too far advanced, or it's advanced enough to take advantage of earlier moisture and so on. So there's a lot of advantages that come with this that are pretty similar to what you would get with a winter wheat when all goes well.
Right. When all goes well. So let's dig into a little bit about this year's conditions, Brian, and how the trial went this year with the ultra early seeding. So you're using soil temperature as the trigger. So that was 0 degrees or 2 degrees for soil temp. And as you mentioned, that was as early as February that you rolled out in the past. So walk me through, how did 2021 go?
Well, I mean, and we started this back in 2015, so we've been doing this a long time, and we've probably accumulated in the neighborhood of at least 24 site years. So we've got 3 publications out of it. So it's well established. We've proved the concept, and now we're into scale up. And that was a cool thing about this year, and in the last couple, is that now the farmers are scaling it up. And so you had farmers on Twitter who had contacted me asking me about it, and you know, and of course this is real biased, but every farmer that's contacted me that I've counseled to go do it, and basically, yeah, you're right. The prescription is pretty much as soon as you register 0 to 2 degrees in the top 2 inches of soil, that's when you go. So as soon as you register that, if the soil conditions allow it, and obviously we're real about this, it won't happen every year at every site, but more often than not it does, because we've got producers in central, northern, southern Alberta doing it, Saskatchewan, and everyone that does it, they're like, nobody else in this community has tried this. I'm going to go do it. And then they come back with a follow-up and say, usually there's a mid follow-up that says, geez, right now it's getting snowed on. There's snow. Like, you think it's really going to be okay? And I'm like, yeah, I think it's going to be. And sure enough, they come back a month later and they say, this is the best crop I've ever had. So we're real pleased about that. And if you see some of them on Twitter, they're like, thanks for the research that you do. To me, that's the best compliment you can get, because you're taking the science. Yeah, you're publishing it in peer-reviewed science and all that, but the ability to take that innovation, scale it, and get good results and good feedback from the guys who you designed it for, and the guys and girls you designed it for in the first place, is really, really rewarding.
Well, and I would agree that, anecdotally though, and even through, if anyone listens to the Farmer Rapid Fire, Pete has pushed for getting in there early as well. And I think this year there were several farmers that were so glad they did, because it turned so dry. We've certainly heard reports that very early seeded was their best yield of the entire year. So pretty amazing. Now, Peter, of course, who I'm pretty sure if his nickname wasn't Wheat Pete, it would be frost seeding. So he says, why 0 to 2 degrees, Brian? Why not -2? Why not -4? Why not punch through that frost like we do here?
And you could get more specific and experiment with that. What we found and decided on was, in a little bit of experience, we have pretty aggressive hoe type openers, and that were from ConservaPac, which is now John Deere. And if the soil's tight and frozen and you try and go in with that, there was one site year out of the 24 where we ripped up pretty good aggregates at 0. So that's kind of what we decided on. If somebody wants to experiment that because they have discs, that's a really good question. And yeah, it's kind of neat. Like, some of the farmers are taking ownership of it too and saying, well, why not -4? Or, Kent Sarita in Rolling Hills, he's like, forget that. Why not dormant in the fall? I'm going to try that. And so you get pushed to try and experiment with different things. So it's been a really cool experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the equipment obviously is going to make a difference, right? Potentially, depending on your conditions. But walk us through what has gone along with, obviously, putting it in the ground early, but we've touched on this a little bit, but I want to dig into it a bit more. what sets up that crop for success? So how important, what is in the work that you've done, what is sort of the agronomy package that has gone with getting that seed in the ground super early?
Well, just a quick comment about the hole opener versus disc. We have an ongoing study with that right now, and so far, I would say it's the same. There's a slight advantage to the hoe, but I think over time that's gonna become an artifact of whatever. I don't think it's gonna be that real. I think that'll level out. To your question about the system, again, maybe a similar system to what we recommend for winter wheat or something in between. We've advocated for higher seeding rates out west. We have producers now going 400, at least 400 is what we recommend seeds per square meter, or 40 seeds per square foot for spring wheat, and at least 450 or 45 for winter wheat. So a good high seeding rate, dual fungicide insecticide seed treatment, regular fertility. And then to your point though, what we've also managed to do in this, and that's why we have a PhD student, Graham Collier, working on some of this, is we've also turned some of the agronomics on its head, because you don't need a pre-seed burn down now, right? What are you going to be spraying? Because there's nothing green out there, pretty much. So so now he's experimented in looking at things like pyroxasulfone, a soil residual instead of that. Mm-hmm. Is there more opportunity for enhanced efficiency or slow release fertilizers, that sort of thing? So it's kind of a winter wheat agronomic package, but there's other things to it that we're still going to tweak. And that's the other neat thing, is that you start off with this as a foundation, and now you're just stacking questions that you answer. And so you keep stacking on onto that system. And it's going to be a little bit different, but that's kind of the cool part about it.
Yeah. Now, and that's just it, is that this isn't spring seeding as per usual, and it's not winter wheat because it's not growing necessarily in the fall. So it is somewhere in between. And so it's really neat to see sort of where perhaps there are advantages as far as applications and these sorts of things go, which I think is really cool. So some great comments coming in as well about hoe drills, some of the differences in some of the equipment. But Dr. Dave Hooker's got a question. Does Agricorp, so for insurance, accept ultra early seeding of spring wheat in the fall? None of us work for Agricorp, and so Dr. Dave, I'll say I'm going to look into that because I don't know. So
It brings up an interesting point, though, because part of why I started this was because of the arbitrary dates that farmers would follow. And arbitrary calendar dates, at least around here, often were tied to a business situation or a risk situation. Either the bank was mandating it or it was a crop insurance deadline. So basically down here in southern Alberta, the model was, as long as you're in by May 10th, you're good with your cereals. And in fact, a lot of agronomic research that's been published too, specifies a date. And that date, we've proven how reliable that date is, because 0 degrees for our first 3 years, it happened the first year, March 6th, then February 16th, then April 26th. So there's your variability if you're going to rely on a calendar date of what it looks like. So, Mother Nature doesn't really care about your calendar date, right?
No. Well, and Joanna, like you mentioned, like last year, where we've got that video of the first week of April where it looked beautiful, but then it did, like April was it. We had this super early thaw and we had like no snow, and then it just was cold and
I thought that was going to be the most unreal winter wheat growing year ever, based on early April, and then it turned cold very quickly, and it stayed like that for 4 to 6 weeks, and it basically stayed at that growth stage that entire time, and then the switch happened and we went from 0 to 100. And then it did started growing really quick, and then it did speed up.
Exactly. So no, it was a very bizarre, but I mean, Brian, you're right in that, even this, so in this year, and Farmer Jim Hale's got a great question about what's a great agronomic package for 2 inches of season rainfall. He farms at Lancer, Saskatchewan. And so If you've got any tips, I'm going to tell them to move, but that's just me. Anyway, come visit me in the valley, Jim. But no, but I mean, realistically, this year was one of those that, I mean, it didn't matter what you did for some areas. There just was no rain. I mean, there's only so much you can do. But as you shared, Brian, definitely in some of these very dry areas, the earliest seeded was the most successful. So what do you think added to that? Did they get a bit of snowfall early, or that tiny bit of extra moisture in the spring that really made the difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And like, so by the time you ramp up about 24 site years of data, and particularly for our Lethbridge dryland location, which has just been getting its ass kicked with drought year after year, um,
Mm-hmm.
what we found at a minimum going in with an ultra early system gives you way more yield stability. So consistent yields year after year after year, field after field. So to me, that's as important as a yield advantage. But the reality too was that for the most part, if you waited if you waited till the recommended time, you were suffering a yield drag, and quite often earlier when it comes to moisture capture, like you say, generally coincides with ultra early seeding more so than waiting till the first week of May.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this year, in several conversations that we had, it was so dry and there wasn't any snow cover, and there were so many farmers who, when we talk about calendar dates, well, it's April 15th, should we go? Well, no, because we that's too early, because the calendar says it's too early. But realistically, this is the work that's showing, it's probably, if the conditions are right, if the soil's warm, and by warm, not frozen, but if it's thawed, then no, it is time to go. It doesn't matter that it's April 6th or April 5th or
Yeah.
whatever it was, right? Yes. So Scott says early seeding means it can be more efficient with water as they grow more in the cold. I also suspect, so I'm not sure all the components of it, but when I think about the wind and I think about just water loss from the soil, from evapotranspiration, all that sort of stuff. I mean, if you've got something growing, even if it's just that 1 week ahead of something else, it is using water that's there that in a week later it might not be. And as you mentioned, Lethbridge, the research trial there, I mean, did the wind ever stop? I mean, I know it's generally windy, but I mean, it just so dry, like just suck the moisture out of everything, and just that incredible wind. I mean, and I hear about it all the time because, of course, our head office is based in Lethbridge, and Kara's at Kara's at Bow Island, so we hear about it all the time. But just unbelievable how dry. Again, guys, maybe move. I'm just saying. Anyway, okay. So I do want to. Of course, we're 8:45, and I have shown one clip, and that seems to be much more reasonable. But I might actually go to the clip with Brunel. I'm not 100% sure yet, because in that clip, though, it does talk about the Manitoba example of this year, of 2021, which Manitoba was also very dry, and realistically that crop got up and out of the ground with the limited moisture that it had, and that it was uniform and it was consistent. And so maybe that really was why I picked it, was the point about the uniformity and the consistency of the stand. And Joanna, I do want to look at the trial that you did. Obviously, I mean, as we said, it was a pretty great year, so this crop did not face a lot of adversity. But in looking at the differences, how did consistency of that establishment feed into the rest of the agronomic decisions throughout the season?
Well, again, because it was such a perfect year, even those plants or those treatments that maybe had a little bit unevenness in plant establishment early on was able to catch up, because it was able to catch up because it was ideal growing conditions. On a year where we maybe don't have such great conditions and we tend to get a lot less of that uniformity, it really comes into play for things like fusarium head blight management. We want all of those heads to be at the absolute perfect stage, that day 2 with those anthers visible in the middle of that head, to make that application to get the best protection. Now, the newer fungicides, 4T3 timing or at heading timing, are much better and have a wider window of application. But in those instances, the less plant to plant variability you have, the much more likely you are to target that T3 timing better. And also at harvest time, you have a much more uniform crop. You're not requiring a desiccant, those sorts of things. So it's extremely important when it comes to fusarium head blight management in Ontario, anyways.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so there's a good question here, and Brian, I want to bring this up as well because, of course, we had not just incredible dryness, but we had incredible heat. And so the question is, with ultra early seeded, it does mimic, as you said, more of a winter wheat system, which winter wheat tends to run counter to some of the biggest stresses that the crop encounters because of the timing. So did the ultra early crop, where was it maturity wise when all that heat hit? And how much of a benefit would that have been?
Well, I mean, yeah, I see that. Like, there's going to be some years where earlier isn't better. But if you want to wait and plant till June because you think you're going to ride out and get some moisture, that's, to me, that's assuming more risk. That I would say that. All I can say with our study so far is the data over as we accumulate more and more site years, it keeps telling us that ultra early is better than conventional seeding. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so to me, that's kind of the takeaway, and we've replicated it at enough locations, and now we have most farmer perspectives on it. Experiences is positive, but yeah, there's, especially this year, like it was so for us in Lethbridge, as bad as it was, and you wouldn't have been wanting to take this management system to the bin either. But the reality was, as bad as it was in Lethbridge, the ultra early treatments were still better. In fact, they were the only things that actually produced anything at the one site. Everything else was just a write-off. So, but I understand that. Like, there's going to be years where you'll go in, if you went in early on a drought cycle, and all of a sudden you get late rains that would have supported a super late seeding instead. But how the heck do you manage, predict, and roll the dice with that? Because what we've been able to show with ultra early seeding is that it syncs way better to when available radiation occurs too, right? So the best sync to your summer solstice day, where you're going to build up the best photosynthetic machine, assuming that you have enough moisture to maintain it, is again ultra early. So
So for someone like Jim at Lancer, incredibly dry this year, has been dry for quite some time, probably going to be next year. Sorry, buddy. Is that, is that a tool? Because I mean, there are already farmers in drought prone or very dry areas already use so many of the tools available, right? I mean, they're zero till, they're, so is this one of those tools that maybe farmers in those areas should be looking at a little, perhaps more quickly than some other higher moisture areas?
Yeah, I mean, the data is telling us the story that you should, um, and that's what has to serve as the guide, is the hypothesis you test through the science and through the data that you accumulate. And what do we normally recommend to a grower that's trying something new? We don't necessarily say bet the farm on it, but we may say if it's good, if it's good to go, you don't have to plant the entire farm then with the wheat acres you had planned, but maybe try some and compare it to when you normally would, or when your intuition is telling you that you should, and see what happens. And don't try it 1 year in one field and make a bunch of conclusions about it, but try it 3 years and, accumulate 6, 7 fields worth of experience. And then that's going to be a pretty good indication of how well it will work for you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that means, so what are we? We're almost December. So that means we've got like 2.5 months and get the seeder rolling. That's awesome. That cuts winter so short all of a sudden. Look out.
Well, we started tweeting about this in January because at my house here, we got to about minus 0.4, something like that. So it was almost close enough to where the guys would have to go out and plant, and they weren't probably too enthusiastic about doing that in January.
No.
But then, yeah, just the way it happens, then cold weather hit, and I don't think our first date last year was until early March, or March
Okay.
10, 11, something like that. So that's,
Yeah.
you know,
A little more reasonable to have to kick the text.
more
Kick the text
palatable
out.
to some farmers.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so Jim actually wants to know, what about ultra early barley? So knowing what we know about barley versus wheat, how does barley stack up in this system potentially?
It might be okay. Generally what we find with most wheat is that, you know, in as long as it's in a vegetative state, your tolerance is linked to flowering. So that means as long as it stays in the vegetative state, it's probably going to handle a lot of that cold stress. Once it kicks into a reproductive phase and it gets cold, it's going to suffer. Barley should be fairly similar, but we don't know. We have a proposal in right now to get some funding, or try to get some funding. I've tried before and I've been shot down. So we'll see this time around if somebody's willing to write a check, and if they are, then we'll put some science behind our intuition on that one.
Okay. All right, Jim. There you go. Put in the good word. Say, as a farmer, I demand this research, and throw your weight around, see what you can do. All right, Jason's got a great question here for Joanna. Are you looking at different seeding rates? So in looking between these different drills, so the sunflower or the average drill versus the Cedar Force, for future research. So are you working seeding rate into that trial?
So in this trial, seeding rate, we didn't look at seeding rate. We just looked at the drills and we looked at starter treatments. We have the Michigan has the 3-4 years of data from their trials, and they did look at that. So they looked at ultra low seeding rates compared with their conventional drill and their precision planter. And they actually found with their precision planter, their optimum seeding rate was as low as 1 million seeds per acre. And with that precision planter at a seeding rate that low, what they found is that because the plant to plant spacing is much better, the plants are able to better express themselves and sustain, 5 tillers, which is what we'd like to see before we start going to a secondary root system. And so they're finding that we can actually cut our seeding rates back a bit, which is very similar to what they're doing in the UK, 5-inch rows, also lower seeding rates. And so we kind of hypothesized that we would see something similar here. And actually in the Yield Enhancement Network, in a conversation about that last week, that was actually one of the big questions is, can we actually cut our seeding rates back? Because we're finding that we get much more heads per square foot, bigger heads, better 1,000-gram weight, those sorts of things. And so, yeah, there's definitely something to lower seeding rates with the precision planting, and we're looking forward to seeing some more data from that.
Yeah. And quick shout out for that Yield Enhancement Network, the YEN, as it's called. This was the first year for Ontario and parts of the US as well. So really cool to see the results. I think what I found, if anybody followed along or was looking at the results, what I found maybe the most fascinating is how there was a measurement of how much percent of predicted maximum that farmers were achieving. And I don't know about you, Joanna, but I was sort of stunned it was so low, of like the predicted, like it was in the 60s.
Oh, you thought the yields are low? Oh, no.
No,
the
I
yields
thought
are
that,
like,
no, the percent of
Yeah.
predicted maximum. Like, it just, to me, it's like we have so much we could do, right? That
Yeah.
that part. No, the yields were phenomenal. But
Yeah.
that's the part I found fascinating.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a really, and I'm glad it will continue. Jason would like to know how he gets a hold of the Michigan research. So Jason, I can connect you and get that. Yeah,
I'm
is there
happy
an
to share that
easy
with
state?
you.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
send it over.
just
I can
connect
get
me.
it
I've
to
got
Jason.
a pretty detailed report you can have.
Okay, so there you go. Okay, fantastic. And then, so Peter asked, what about other agronomic practices? Any difference in N response or P response? Now, Pete, I'm assuming you mean with ultra early, or Joanna, is that about your trial?
I think he was referring to the ultra early.
Yeah. I think so.
Dr.
We're all
Smith?
trying to read your mind, Pete, and that's a scary, scary idea. No, okay. So we did talk, Brian. You did talk about obviously the seed treatment package, those sorts of things. But yes, let's talk a little bit about fertility. So, are you putting down like starter fertilizer with this as well, or is it just treated seed going in the ground? What does that look like?
No, the other aspects to the study are basically, um, for the most part, following along what we recommend for spring wheat. So if you're a producer that likes to, put down most of your fertilizer at planting, then we have recommendations to do that. And what we're doing with a lot of this work is, in the fall we would probably through Western Ag do that PRS simulator, root simulator thing, and get a snapshot of a recommendation of what we should be putting down. So there's a prescriptive factor you could adopt, or you could go with what you regular do. But there, like I said, there's probably some valid questions in there that we frankly haven't been able to answer yet. If the nitrogen, I think the nitrogen thing is just going to be a farmer preference anyway, because we see that with winter wheat. It's like, well, I want to put it all down. Okay, you want to put it all down. If you want to sideband it, here's what I would do. I would probably put half as a polymer coated urea and half as uncoated urea. All polymer coated urea if you're going to go with the seed, or we know we get good results with a split application as well, where you don't want to put too much down there. You're worried about losses because of when you're putting this stuff in the ground. You could only put down a small percentage and then go in with an enhanced efficiency fertilizer and top dress just to ensure that you're not losing anything.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about phosphorus? So, do you always have phosphorus with the seed or close by, or
Yeah,
how's that handled?
it's a regular farmer practice where the guys will probably, place a little bit with the seed at, at that recommended rate. Definitely none of the nutrient stuff other than the enhanced efficiency and we've put in as part of an actual science question though.
Interesting. Okay. So much, all I hear are just other projects, like some master's projects, maybe some PhD projects. I mean, there's just an abundance of questions to ask, which isn't that, what it's all about. So there you go. So anyone looking for some extra work, start putting a proposal together. There you go.
That's right.
We'll find you lots of students if you want them. Okay. All right. We are approaching. Well, no, we're at 9. We're out of time, which it always does fly. And of course, so apologies to everyone. I got to one clip. As Lara points out, I love this. Someone needs this on a sticker. Good research should generate more research. And I think we have covered that, and I think you're exactly right, Lara. And Joanna now has a list, and Brian has a list, and Farmer Jim apparently has some work to do on advocating for more barley research. So we're just, we're handing out jobs to everybody here. Okay, so thanks to everyone, of course, in the chat. Some great questions, great conversations there. Warren did want to let us know that apparently the feed is like on one platform is slightly ahead, so apparently we can time travel. So that's super cool. Also, I don't know why you're watching it on 2 feeds, Warren. Just watch one. It's the same on all of them, but hey, whatever. And to Brian, of course, and to Joanna, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This has been a lot of fun and some really cool stuff happening. So thank you for sharing all your work and your expertise and your knowledge with us. Thanks so much. And of course, everyone, a quick reminder, make sure you let us know that you've watched tonight so you can get those CEUs. And I will be back next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Cheers, everybody.